Hi there, my people. Hope you're having a great day. Right now it's really dark and stormy out, so actually the perfect day to stay inside and do some artwork. Today I want to kind of do a twofer. I want to show you the supplies I use for doing my pastel paintings, and then also a little demo of a still life with pastel. So join me in the studio and I'll show you what I use. Okay, so here I've got my full-size studio easel. Most of the time when I do demos for you, I'm sitting at my tabletop easel drawing board, but I felt like standing today. So I've got a board here with my paper clipped onto it. I've got a few sheets of newsprint underneath my pastel paper. That creates a little bit of a cushion, and you're going to want that. I think I've mentioned that before in another drawing video. Anytime you're drawing on a hard surface like this, it's really nice to have that little bit of cushion. You kind of have to feel it to experience it, understand why. So I like working on Canson pastel paper. And just like pretty much every paper that I've used up to this point, it's got a smooth side and a rough side. I usually prefer the smooth side if I'm doing charcoal, Conte, graphite, or something like that. But as far as pastel, I like the rough side because it holds a little bit more of the medium. There's other options for doing pastel. You can use a sanded paper where it's like a very fine sandpaper and it comes in different colored sheets. That works great, but I really do like it, but I'm kind of a cheapskate when it comes to the pastels, and it eats them up a little bit quicker. You can also use watercolor paper, and I've seen people use watercolor paper where they will use watercolor and put a color tone down, tone it whatever color they want, and then do pastel on top of that. The Canson paper also comes in numerous colors. You can find it in all kinds of different colors. I usually end up just sticking with kind of a medium tone gray, a little bit warmer or cooler depending. And if you go too wild with the paper color, in my mind it's a little bit distracting. So I try to find something that's pretty neutral and harmonious with whatever I'm working on. Another thing to consider as you're working, have your paper tilted towards yourself a little bit. When I'm doing oil painting, I recommend having that painting tilting towards you a little bit rather than away. That way you don't get glare and things like that on your oil painting. It's a different reason for this though, because as you're working with these chalk pastels, you're going to be having dust falling down. If I have that paper leaning away from me, then that dust is kind of going to streak down the paper. But if it's tilted towards me a little bit, then that dust will just fall away from the painting and not get stuck on the paper. And yes, I did call it a painting, and even if it's a dry media, it could be chalk pastel, it can be colored pencil. Anything that is full color is technically considered painting. So yeah, it's pastel painting. One of the precautions to think about when you're doing a pastel painting is all that dust. So I've got my little dust tray here. I've also got a tarp on the ground here. I'm in a carpeted room. And if you're in a tiled room or a room with just a solid wood floor, you can clean it up easier, but I really don't want to be getting that dust ground into the carpet here. So I'm trying to protect that with the tarp. I've got my clip light up here. This is my Ott light. I love this thing. It's got a gooseneck, and you can clip it on so many tables and easels in different ways, and that works great to get a nice light on your subject. That's a little bit overexposed now, but I'll re-expose for that once I start working on the project. So here are some of my supplies, and if you're going to get really heavy into pastel, you might want to consider getting a nice big wooden box collection of a pastel. I've just kind of got a smattering of a few different brands. These are my Senneliers here. Let me show you those. Those are my favorite. They are a really high quality French-made pastel. They're really vibrant, they're nice and soft. I usually save these for my last layer because they're so soft. They put on these nice juicy strokes. I have some Faber-Castells here. Now if you're just getting started, I would recommend something like this, just a set of 72, because they can get really expensive. I've got a few, I can't remember what it cost for that Sennelier kit, that whole box of half pastels there. But I've got a few. I was at a Dick Blick store and I needed some dark, warm pastels. So I found a few. They had open stock. You could just pick the colors you wanted. And those, I picked those out and I misread the sign. They were over $6 a piece. So I spent nearly $20 just for those 3 full sticks. If you buy a full set, usually it's going to be less per pastel than just buying them open stock like that. But for about the same cost, for maybe 20-25 bucks, you can get a set of 72 Faber-Castell or another similar brand. So these are not as highly pigmented or strong of colors, and they're a little bit harder. But honestly, if you're just trying to get started, I would suggest something like that. Try to find some sets and put those in the description for you to look at. I've got some Grumbacher's over here. This is a portrait set. So you can actually find some sets that are tailored to a certain subject matter. You can get landscape sets, portrait sets, impressionistic sets, sets that lean more towards one or the other primary or secondary colors. These are a little more neutral, so they work pretty well for portraits. And over here I've got just a Hobby Lobby brand gallery set of 36 full stick pastels. The pastels come in different configurations. These Senneliers are round. These Faber-Castells and the Hobby Lobby and the Grumbacher's are all square. The square are a little bit nicer for drawing with. You can get those nice sharp corners and lines. And sometimes I'll use a piece of sandpaper to sharpen a pastel if I need a fine detail. Speaking of fine detail, they do also make pastel pencils. So if you're doing a lot of pastel, especially smaller pastel, I would recommend looking into some of those pastel pencils. That's definitely going to help you get those details. I had a student one time who did some beautiful pastels, but they were trying to do a very small figure with the head, maybe 1.5 inches tall. And with these sticks like this, unless you're doing kind of an impression of the face, it's very difficult to get any type of detail with that size of a pastel stick. There are different hardnesses of soft pastels. I know I've seen charts before. I'll try to find one and put it in here for you to see. So that's something to consider. Remember, I said I like to use my Senneliers at the end for those juicy strokes, and that's usually what people recommend, is starting with the harder pastels, blocking in your colors and your tones, and then getting to the softer pastels for those later layers. A couple other incidental supplies I have here. Now the pastels are going to get dirty. As you wipe them over each other, they will pick up colors that are not their original colors. So let me pick up one of these Grumbacher's here. So you can see this pastel is super dirty, and you have to protect the cleanliness of your colors if you want some vibrancy. So I always have a roll of paper towel. As you can see, just wiping it on that paper towel, how much of that dirty dust that cleans off. So paper towels, definitely helpful. I also have some pre-wet paper towels over here. Not super soaked, but just kind of moist. Because as I blend, and you can blend with these, you have to be careful. I prefer to try to layer the colors rather than blending too much. And you could use things like brushes or blending stumps, but they're going to get dirty as well. So I prefer to just use my fingers to blend. Another great option would probably be just a whole box of Q-tips. I mean, you could blend an area and throw them out after you're done. But it's that same idea of protecting the color and trying to avoid getting everything this dirty, dusty mess. So if I'm blending with my fingers and I get all that color on there, and then I try to go blend to a different area, I don't want to carry color from one area to another necessarily. So I will take the damp paper towel and just wipe my fingers off really quickly. I've got a spray bottle over there, not for spraying the pastels, but to wet down some more paper towels if I need. I've got my little trash bin over here to throw garbage out. Something else I like to do when I'm working with the pastels is it takes me a little bit of time as I get into the painting to figure out exactly what colors I want to use. And once I decide what colors are going to work best for my project, I will usually kind of pull them out and just rest them outside of their little holder. It's a little easier for me to recognize with all these colors around here. So that helps me. And one of the things I really like about pastel is it forces me to use colors I have. You can blend them. I think they look better if you leave them a little more layered rather than just completely blending them out. So that forces me to pick colors that I might not have otherwise used, and I think that you can get some very interesting effects with that. So the most important thing to focus on as you're picking your colors is get the right value. So you need them to be the correct lightness or darkness, and get the right general color, and then temperature wise see if you can get it, if you need a warmer green or a cooler green. I'm doing this little green jar here. So anyways, those are some of the benefits I think to working with the pastel, that you get to choose colors that might not otherwise have been used if you had the ability to just mix endlessly. Here's my project so far. I have sketched in the image here, this kind of a cruise for olive oil or something like that. So I've sketched it in here. I sketched it in pretty large. Remember I said it's kind of difficult to get those teeny little details with pastel unless you have the pastel pencils. So that's why I've sketched it out quite large here to give myself enough room to work with. And you want to be careful as you sketch it out. I just used pencil here, but you don't want to press too hard, otherwise you may dent the paper. And you could use something like vine charcoal or a charcoal pencil, but that might get a little bit dirty as you mix your colors in and layer those on top. So yeah, I've just lightly sketched it in here. I could probably lift a little bit of this out, and I might do that with a kneaded eraser, just so it's not too heavy and not showing through my pastel. Speaking of kneaded erasers, you can also use those to lift out pastel, but once again, like the blending stump issue, you don't want to have, all these colors mixing into your eraser. So you need to be careful with that if you're going to use that. A lot of times I can just use paper towels if I need to lift out some color and go over with a different layer. All right, I think that about covers all the materials and some of the starting basics. So let's get into it. Alright, it's actually been a while since I've used these, so let's see if I can figure that out again. As I mentioned, I think I am going to try to just lift a little bit of this out. Don't want to totally lose my lines. I drew out some of these highlights and things. It might not have been really necessary because most of it will probably end up getting covered anyway. So I'll just lift this out a little bit, so I still have some guides for where to put my color. Okay, so hopefully that is light enough not to get in the way of the color, but dark enough to still see what I'm doing. Just like any other painting, at least an oil painting or maybe an acrylic painting, even a drawing, like on my last charcoal portrait I did, I like to establish the darkest value and the lightest value. So let's see, looks like I got a couple nice dark greens. This is a Faber-Castell, and you can also, if you had some scrap on the side, you could use that for checking your color. I think that'll be a good start for that. You can layer the pastel. It really is an opaque medium, but you do have to be careful. Like right up here, there's going to be some, not quite highlights, but some of those warmer greens showing through. So I don't want to go super heavy with the pastel here yet. I try to build it up in those layers, and I think I mentioned that a couple times already. You can probably see a little bit of that texture showing up in the paper. So I will just lightly put down some colors and tones. And I'm going for approximations at this point. I've seen setups from professional pastel artists where they use pastel exclusively or at least most of the time, they will have just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pastels laid out there. So you can get entire sets and different brands and pretty much get any color you would need. But like I mentioned before, I kind of like having a little more of a limited palette, and that allows me to maybe pick some more interesting colors. See right here, I'm blending it in. If I just put that kind of loosely on, you see that texture of the paper. For these first tones, I kind of consider them like washes. I like to use my finger to really smear it into that grain of the paper, into the tooth of the paper. And yeah, here there's some of those lighter streaks of green as well, but I'm gonna just start with this whole darker mass. Try to squint at my subject and simplify those colors and values and not get too caught up in the detail right away. This is not exactly the color I want, but it's pretty close. So I will have to layer some other colors on top of it to get it to the right value and then to neutralize it a little bit, especially those really deep greens. They are just super dark. You can barely tell they're green at all. They look like a kind of a warmish black or something. This is a really dark color right here. Spend all that time drawing it out and just to kind of lose all those details, but that's okay. At least, if nothing else, doing that preliminary drawing familiarizes you with the shapes and your subject, and you get to know what's happening in there. So it's never a waste to practice drawing, even if you cover it up with your paint or your pastels or whatever you're working with. I'll try to get this pretty close to what I want it to be for the final color, because this is about my darkest value in the whole picture. So we'll kind of blend that in, smear that in a little bit. Let's see how dirty my fingers are already. That's where the magic of the damp paper towel comes into play. And it's not going to get rid of all the color, but it will clean your fingers well enough so that you're not going to dirty up the colors that you're working on. So here, this is really, oh, actually there's one. That's a really nice one. Okay, so this is my Sennelier. Look at how dark that is. That is beautiful. What a nice color. That's about perfect right there. So sometimes, you know, even if I don't have all the colors, even a blind squirrel finds a nut every once in a while. So yeah, even if I don't have all the colors, occasionally I will come across one that works very well. This is such a super soft color. It makes me kind of sad to use these because I see them dwindling away. I can always get more, but that's more money. So this is, boy, that's right about perfect. You can maybe use a little more warmth, and that's why I wanted to get these full sticks at the art supply store. I find that with pastel, it's kind of hard to get a rich dark, a rich warm dark. So that's where I didn't really mind spending the money to get these colors that I wanted. Okay, so that's going to be my darkest color. Something you want to look for with the pastel is that variety of color. I'll try to mention some other pastel artists. Honestly, I'm not too familiar with a lot of them. Daniel Green is one of my favorites. Harley Brown, probably my very favorite pastel artist, and he just does some gorgeous work, and he has a lot of variety of color in every area. Now I want to try to go for my lightest value, which is probably that streaming light in the background. Either that or some of these highlights, but I will just go with this for now. And it's not pure white. There's a little bit of warmth to it. So thankfully I do have some pastels here that are kind of an off-white, and that should work really well. That's a Sennelier again. So you kind of have to use the shape of the pastel to your advantage. Here, if I need a small shape, I just use the edge. If I need to fill in a large area, I use the side. That's a great color. That's so nice. I'll put a little bit of pure white down so you can see how stark that looks. Some artists will use like an unbleached titanium white or like a Naples yellow light instead of white if they're, you know, doing oil painting or acrylic or something like that. Because honestly, most of the time, those light areas are not going to be pure white. I don't ever remember an instance where pure white looks good on a highlight. So it can definitely be worth experimenting and exploring and keeping your whites maybe a little bit warmer, like this. So that dulled it a little bit as I blended it out, but that gives me a pretty good idea of my lightest value. Okay, let's put a little bit of just pure white right next to that. And that honestly doesn't look too bad right now because it's surrounded by this slightly warmer color and it's blending in with it as I put it down. So that can work, but just a pure white is kind of cold looking. Hopefully I can erase that out or my background. So yeah, I could layer in a little bit of white on top of that warmer off-white color I just put in there. And remember, you can blend, but be careful not to overblend. It's just like a charcoal drawing. You don't want to overblend. Same with graphite. Even oil paint, you don't want to overblend. One of the reasons I like the chalk pastels so well is they just remind me of working with oil paint for some reason. I know that sounds weird, but the way they layer and the opacity and even the way they blend just kind of reminds me of oil paint. So I enjoy that. Another benefit of working with the chalk pastels is the blending. You don't have to worry about it drying. You can blend this forever. Now that can also be kind of a disadvantage as well. Once you finish a painting, if it gets smudged, then you're going to have to rework it. I think the best way to protect a pastel painting is to just get it behind glass in a mat. I have tried the spray fix before, and I know there's a lot of artists that will use the spray fix. I just am not a fan of it. I did this portrait one time of this cute little girl, and I was really happy with it. And then I went to spray fix it, and the spray fix just spit all over the painting, and so it just was left with these permanent little speckles all through it. So I have heard other professional artists, I think Harley Brown recommends not spraying your painting, your pastel painting, just putting a mat on it and getting it behind glass. That is going to protect it from getting smudged. Even with that though, sometimes there will be dust falling in the frame. When I used to work at a frame shop, every once in a while people would bring in an old pastel painting and they'd want us to reframe it, and you'd open it up and there'd be this layer of dust right at the bottom where some of the pastel had fallen off of the painting. This is a little bit slow going right now, but once I get it blocked in, start gaining momentum, it will pick up the pace. It goes a little bit quicker. Another thing blending in like this does for you is it kind of knocks down the excessive amount of dust on the paper, and it prepares the paper to receive that next layer pretty well. I know that I usually advise against blending with your fingers because you get the oils in there, and that's probably the same case for this, but like I was saying, it's just a little too much to consider having brushes for every different color to blend or blending stumps for every different color. And so far I haven't had any issues with blending with my fingers for the pastel. Maybe once you get enough dust on your fingers, it kind of stops spreading the oil on the paper. Hopefully I'll get to show you here eventually. Another aspect of the pastel that is very reminiscent of oil paint is if I, accidentally go too far off to the side, I can come back with my background color and cover over that. Let's see, I'm not sure if this is the exact color I'll need, but yeah, as long as that errant stroke isn't too thick, you can come back with another color and carve over that, just like you can with oil paint. The square pastels like this, I find that they are a little easier to get some of the details than the round pastels. I'll try to stop talking and focus on the painting here. My grandfather on my mom's side, Grandpa Hoffman, he was an artist. He was one of my first influences, and he used to do chalk talks. So if you ever grew up in Sunday school or anything, you may have seen some people do chalk talks where you illustrate a story as you tell a Bible lesson to the audience. And I don't know, maybe that's another influence why I like the pastels. I've only done a couple chalk talks. He was better at it than I am, but yeah, that can be challenging as well, to try to tell a story as you're working on a piece. Here I'm just putting little test strokes on my painting to see what color is the closest. So this is one of those nice soft senneliers, but that's the color I want, so I'm just going to go with it. And very soon here I'm going to have to get into some layering, because none of these colors, other really than maybe that highlight and this dark shadow, really none of these colors are exactly what I want. So I'm going to have to start lightly layering on top and gradually bringing those colors to a more accurate state. I've got that stroke that's too light and cool, so rather than an eraser, just using the paper towel works great to lift out that excess of color. Since I kind of lost those details, I'm having to try to redraw some of these details as I go, but that's okay. It's all part of the process. There are pastel artists much better at this than I am. I do consider myself kind of a jack of all trades, which I'm okay with. I really enjoy getting to explore different mediums, and I find it helpful in teaching to be able to at least have something to share with people who are using different mediums. I'm just going to indicate some of these lights. I'll probably have to work over them and then rework them later, but let's give a little hint of some of those lighter, warmer colors. See, here's where that light can overlap that dark, just like an oil paint. And you're going to have to try to keep your pastels clean if you're continually going over a different color. Here we can blend a little bit and get some of that softy glow. I don't mind texture in paintings or pastels or anything like that, but I do kind of just want to cover up some of this. It's a little bit distracting in this dark area. I'm not trying to outline the jar here, but that's just something that happens with the glass. So you'll get these dark reflected outlines or edges around the object. And that actually is part of what helps these things look like they're made out of glass, is getting those little dark accents where they need to be. And make sure your fingers are clean when you're going to blend. See here I'm getting some mess in this highlight, but I'll go back and clean that up later. Boy, it is really kind of cumbersome and a little bit frustrating trying to get the detail in. So I'm glad I didn't draw this any smaller. Sorry to bellyache. And there we go, dark over light. So yeah, just like oil or acrylic or gouache, any opaque medium, you can go light over dark or dark over light with the chalk pastels. If there's a lot of excess dust built up on your paper, you don't want to blow on it, otherwise it'll get all over the place. You'll start breathing it in. So remember, we've got our paper tilted towards ourselves. Just tap. I don't know if you can see some of that dust falling off. It'll fall on that shelf that we have. This is such an unprecise medium compared to something where you could have, you know, like a really sharp pencil or even a nice pointy paintbrush. So sometimes you'll have to work things back and forth, like these thin little dark accents on the edge of the glass. When I use that, it's a beautiful dark green, but it's so soft it just is hard to get that sharp edge with. So sometimes I might just put that edge in and then come in with the lighter color and trim it down some. And it's really definitely a drawing medium. Sometimes if I go for one of these thin little highlights and it's not quite right, that's one of the nice things about the pastel. You can just wipe it out and then go for it again. These square pastels work really well for those thin little lines. The round ones will also, but you gotta kind of just use the sharp edge of the cylinder. And if a particular color is a little bit too bright, you can just tap it and knock it back down into the value family it should be in. This is just one of those Hobby Lobby kind of generic pastels. There is a name on there, but I don't think they sell them as open stock. But if you get a nice one like, or a nice brand like Rembrandt or Sennelier or Holbein or something like that, they usually will have codes or numbers and names for the different colors. So just take note of those. You know, if they've got a wrapper on there and you find a color you really like, take a note of those, because you should be able to order them by themselves without having to get a whole entire new set. I'm just trying to peel off the wrapper here to get a little more exposed, and thought I would mention that. Oops. At this point, everything is pretty well blocked in. So now I can focus on trying to refine some of these areas, especially the bottle there. I want to get that looking a little more glassy right here, especially. I think that's about it for me on this one. I'm gonna let it sit overnight. I'll take a look in the morning again, see if there's anything else I want to adjust real quick. I'm not the best at this. I'm kind of that jack of all trades, master of none. Just kind of like playing with different mediums. And I would highly recommend looking at Harley Brown and Daniel Green, and I know there are lots of other artists as well with pastel, but those two come to mind. They are some of my favorites. I think Harley Brown is a little bit more loose in his application, and then Daniel Green can get almost photorealistic with his pastel paintings. So, all right. Yeah, if I do anything else in the morning, I will show you that. But as of right now, I think I'm gonna leave it. I might do something else in the morning, but that's good for now. Okay, so that is about it. This morning, I'm sorry I didn't turn the camera on. I did a couple things, like a couple little dark accents here, a little cleanup of the light over here. So not really much more than what you saw last time. Yeah, I did want to show you one more thing though before we leave here today. Remember that tray that I put underneath my pastel paper? Look at all that dust. That's over probably 4 hours of working or so. That's a lot of dust, and who knows how much got kicked up with the air conditioner going on and things like that. So yeah, definitely good to have that there. Thank you so much for joining me again. I appreciate it. Hope you have a great day, and I'll catch you next time.